All right, everybody. So, as you might know, Dwarkesh Patel is the host of a big podcast, and he recently interviewed Ilya Sutskever. Now, that interview, I'm not here to deconstruct that interview. What I'm here to deconstruct is the aftermath, because what Dwarkesh then did was he wrote a blog post about, why is AI progress so slow? And he keeps talking about AGI, AGI, AGI. And he doesn't seem to realize that we're kind of on a spectrum. And so he's kind of stuck in this binary of we have AGI or we don't. And I'm not gonna deconstruct his blog post, which you can check out here. It's over on Substack, Thoughts on AI Progress. What I'm going to address is one specific thing, which is the output gap. So the output gap is basically, why is it that we're saturating benchmarks, but uptake hasn't accelerated and it hasn't changed the world yet? So this is really what he's looking at. So if we really break it down, if we look at his blog post and we look at the things that Dwarkesh is concerned about, he says, why is it that we're saturating all these benchmarks and we're clearly at like superhuman capability, but it's only on narrow tasks? But of course, LLMs are not good at just narrow tasks. You can train them and they're good at things that they haven't even seen before. Now, of course, some people still argue, oh, well, it saw it somewhere in its training data. Well, we saw with reasoning models that they can tackle things that are outside their training data. Now, the performance does fall off, but also the objectively speaking, whatever you believe about intelligence or whatever you believe about the models, they're saturating more and more benchmarks, and productivity and GDP hasn't risen commensally. So that is the primary problem that he is wrangling with, because he had this excitement, as a lot of us did, and then it's like, well, we were past the hype cycle, so now we're in the trough of disillusionment. That's, if you zoom out, that's kind of the bigger picture. So this is what he's responding to: the economic reality versus the benchmark reality. Now, of course, this is what I and other people have been saying for a while, which is that benchmarks are not reality. Now, this is one of the other kind of mistakes that he's making, because when Dwarkesh talks about AGI, he talks about continuous learning and generalization. And what he's really looking for is that we're trying to create a drop-in worker. We're trying to create a digital human, and that if it's not a digital human, then it's not AGI. And so again, that's the premise that he's operating from, which is not really how technology works. And also, it's missing the forest for the trees. So the idea is you have a human employee that can use all of these tools, and they're all in one, and then you have the AI agent that can use some of them as long as there's an API, but it also doesn't have any level of autonomy yet, where it just shows up every day and generally knows what to do and where to find work, and shows up at meetings, and away it goes. So unlike a human employee who learns a company's culture and code base over months, the AI's memory is effectively resets after every interaction. This is primarily a software problem. The data is there. It's a matter of building the context and making sure that you have context management. There are startups that are working on context management for corporations. But again, the software is not mature. So basically, when you take a step back, what is it that we've invented? We've invented a jet engine, and now we have to build the rest of the aircraft. And Dwarkesh is kind of frustrated because the rest of the aircraft isn't there yet. Now, his conclusion, though, is because AI cannot function as an autonomous drop-in remote worker, its economic impact is stalled. He believes we're in an age of research to solve this, not an age of deployment. This is true. But there's reasons for that gap. And so let me unpack a little bit more about kind of where things are coming from. So the analyst blind spot, is it a tech problem or a perspective problem? So he is looking at model capability under a microscope, whereas the rest of the enterprise is very messy. And this is more or less what he's saying, which is that enterprises are big and messy, and there's culture and there's tribal knowledge and that sort of thing. But when he says AGI, we need AGI to be a drop-in remote worker. That's the primary thing I disagree with, is that, like, yes, eventually we will have agents that are drop-in remote workers, but what I'm here to tell you is that people are still going to say that's not AGI. And it's because the technology, the way that technology is implemented, particularly in enterprises, is a little bit different. Now, this next part is going to sound a little bit like an ad hominem, but an ad hominem is only if you say if it's something unrelated. What I'm pointing out is that Dwarkesh is a younger guy, and he never worked in the trenches of an enterprise. So it's surprising to him to learn the hard way. If you're just looking at the science and the technology of what is it the model can do, what is it the jet engine can do, and then you look at the rest of the avionics and the rest of the airframe, it's going to be like, wow, this problem is a lot more complicated than I thought. So he's about 25 years old. He graduated in 2021 and went straight to being a full-time podcaster. So he never sat through a messy enterprise decade-long technology adoption cycle. Guess what? I have. Multiple times. That was kind of my shtick when I was still a full-time employee, was I was brought into companies like Cisco Systems, like Advanced Auto Parts, like Duke Medicine, that were going through technology transformations or technology modernizations. That was just what I happened to do. And so even when a technology is good, this is what I'm here to tell you, even when a technology is prime time ready, it is the default option, it still takes a long time for the enterprise to adopt it, even if it's already perfect, even if it's already mature. Now, agents, this year, 2025, was the first year that agents even really remotely became viable. So what he's expecting is, okay, it's viable, why isn't it changing everything yet? And the reality is, it takes enterprises anywhere from 3 to 10 years to adopt a new technology. Now, here's another way of looking at it. So anyone who's been in the enterprise space, who's worked with Fortune 500 companies or large institutions, whether it's state bureaucracies or other government institutions or large, tech firms or non-tech firms, there is the day 0 or 1 capability, which is what he's been looking at. So this is the primary source of the gap. And this is not to say Dwarkesh is an idiot. It's just he's taken a different career path. So day 1/0 capability, there's benchmarks, there's compute, there's scaling laws. All of that is true and real and exciting. Day 2 is very, very boring. It's operations and governance. So there's security, which is RBOC. There's compliance, there's backups, there's liability, there's change management. Now, I have a story to share, and that is developers, gotta love them. They do some great things. But when you talk security and compliance with most developers, they glaze over and they say, just give me root access to AWS. Just give me root access to Azure. I'll do it all. I'll figure it out. They think that they're masters of the world. And in fact, many developers don't even know what RBOC is and why it's important. And I've literally been in meetings with with software architects, trying to explain to them why you need RBOC, why you can't just have local logins to every Linux machine on your AWS instance, and that doesn't scale. Because what happens when that one person leaves? And we literally had, at one of my companies, we literally had developers leave in a tizzy, in a huff, when infrastructure and security came in and said, hey, you actually have to do things according to best practices. You can't just have local logins and SSH certs to get into all the machines. You need an actual proper process. And they were so in a huff because they're like, no, this is ours. AWS is ours. We own that. Get your hands out of it. We're going to keep it vertically integrated with only our department. You can't do that as an enterprise. These are all the kinds of experiences that Dwarkesh and many other people simply don't have. Even Ilya. So like when we point out like Ilya Sutskever, great guy, but he's always been in the gold standard labs. He went straight from college to, I think, DeepMind was his first job. So he's always had root access to everything, functionally unlimited budget, and has never really had to worry about scaling a product or an infrastructure in real enterprise operations in the real messy world. So a lot of these guys, this is their world, which is great. The scaling laws, the algorithms, they know this. But then you got to bring people in like me who know all this, which is much messier and much more complicated. So the reason I'm lingering on this slide is because this is the really big gap. When people say like scaling laws have given out and why is it not moving the needle on businesses? Why is uptake slower? It's because of all this. It's not because the technology is ready. I'm here to tell you that as someone who has been in both worlds, the technology is ready and it's only going to get better. But what I'm also here to tell you is that many companies, there is so much institutional inertia. It's going to take them so long to even get ready to just be ready for this level of automation. I mean, think about cloud, right? So for those not in the know, there's this concept called cloud, which is basically you run your stuff in virtualization in another data center, and in a data center that someone else runs. That's what AWS is, that's what Microsoft Azure is, and that's what GCP is, Google Cloud is. Those are all cloud providers. Now it's just a data center. But the idea is that you only pay for the compute and the software that you need in that other data center. So whether it's virtual machines or software as a service or whatever it happens to be. Now, back in 2010, 2012, when virtualization was first really introduced at the enterprise layer, only the first movers really had started adopting virtualization, which is private cloud, back in like 2009, 2010, 2012. And it was becoming the default option by around that time. And then public cloud was even less proven out. And it wasn't until like 2016, 2017 that public cloud was even considered the default option for a lot of use cases. But then there's laggards. Some of the companies that I worked for were still working on their cloud strategy, even just getting into cloud in 2021. So my point here is that even once a technology is ready, when it has the day zero or day one capability, it can still take 2, 3, 5, 10 years or longer before all companies they know how to deal with it because of that institution. And that's part of what Dwarkesh is talking about. But he keeps talking about AGI, where it just needs to be a drop-in employee. I can tell you, no CFO or CEO is looking for drop-in employees. That's not what they're looking for. That's not how technology automates jobs. Now, this is a good example of that. The fallacy of replacement, waiting for the mechanical horse. Dwarkesh wants AI to perfectly mimic a human worker, a mechanical horse, but disruptive technologies don't replace. They unbundle and restructure. So when we say unbundle and restructure, what we're talking about is a business is a collection of value streams. So a value stream is something that moves the needle for the business. And that value stream is going to be work products. So, filing tax forms, sending out billables, providing goods and services, getting money in, processing those forms, whatever it happens to be. There's a bunch of different value streams. And a value stream is basically a collection of tasks and work products and work items that you need in order to run the business. Now, what a job is a collection, is a bundle of those tasks and work products that make sense to a lot to a single human as part of that value stream. So what we're talking about here is the infrastructure that you need for horses is very different from the infrastructure that you need for trains. And until a city or a state had put in the infrastructure for trains, it still made sense just to use horses most of the time. Why? Because trains need railroad tracks. And so when we talk about railroad tracks in AI, that's when we're talking about everything that was up here. Arbok. So you've got security and access, you've got compliance, you've got backups, liability, change management. That's the rails. Most companies have not built the rails yet. And that's what I and others are working on with our enterprise consulting, which is teaching them how to build the rails in the first place. Because right now, what Dwarkesh is thinking is, we just need a mechanical horse. We need to take a biological human and just do a one-to-one replacement. Now, I and others have talked about KVM jobs, keyboard, video, mouse jobs, where in the long run, any task that you can do with a keyboard, video, mouse can be done by an agent. That is true, but there's no reason that the bundle of tasks that one single human or one single horse does needs to be kept bundled together as a, quote, job. It's more that you break that job apart into the individual tasks and the individual value streams and say, okay, which parts of these can we automate away? And so whenever you hear an economist talk about, tasks, task automation, that's what they're talking about, because work is just a list of tasks and knowledge and context that goes into those tasks. But a job is a bundle of those. Okay, I think I'm repeating myself. I think you get the idea. So the real bottleneck is just organizational physics. So there's the departments of no. And I don't know why it chose the Ethereum logo for the AI agent, but I guess AI agents could run on Ethereum. So okay, whatever. I just wanted to address the elephant in the room. Now, when you have all of these departments inside large organizations and you want any new technology, it doesn't even matter if it's an old school technology. It has to be justified. And so the CFO is the one who reports directly to the board and the CEO. And they're going to be the one to say, you know what, this technology looks great. It can definitely move the needle, but it's not going to pay for itself. And that's one of the biggest problems right now is that all of us IT guys, all of us technologies, the CIOs and the CTOs are, very excited about these agents. And we have a few use cases, we have a few successes, and then we want to roll it out more broadly. But the CFO is like, how much is that going to cost? How much is it going to pay? What's the ROI going to be? How are we going to, how is it going to mesh with our cybersecurity posture? Is HR even going to train people on this? Has legal approved it? And so you end up with all these gatekeepers in institutions. It has literally nothing to do with the capability of the technology right now. That's what I'm here to tell you, is that yes, if you just look at the benchmarks and compute and scaling laws, it's like, okay, yes, the jagged frontier and that sort of thing. Like, there's all kinds of things that the AI can't do yet. But what I'm here to tell you is that the AI is good enough to do a lot of work. It's just that the inertia is there. And 2025 was year zero of AI agents. So many enterprise executives, CFOs, CEOs, CIOs, CTOs, they might be tangentially aware of AI agents. They might use Copilot, but there's a really big difference between using Microsoft Copilot and building and deploying AI agents. So, that's and looking for a one-to-one drop-in is really not what any of these groups are looking for, anyways, in the first place. So it's not a dead end. What we're at is about, and I use virtualization analogies because that was the meat and potatoes of my career. So we're basically in the 2002 era for virtualization. So one of the original Windows Server virtualization platforms was VMware GSX. So that's a hosted virtualization. And then what it took was a little bit more for that to become more and more sophisticated. So if you've ever used VirtualBox, the enterprise version of VirtualBox came out in the early 2000s. By 2009, 2010, they had matured to where you could puppet multiple VirtualBoxes. And then it got even more sophisticated where you can do it all remotely and so on and so forth. But the point is that took about 7 years of product maturity. And then while the product was maturing, the IT departments were also maturing and figuring out, what is this thing even used for? How can we justify this cost? And so what we're at right now, we're at the shadow IT version. So shadow IT is a term from the industry where lots and lots of people are adopting a technology and they're not supposed to be doing it because guess what? HR hasn't signed off on it, cybersecurity hasn't signed off on it, and legal hasn't signed off on it, and the CFO hasn't signed off on it. And we get this from all kinds of people, from professors and teachers. We get it from people within organizations. They're like, "Oh yeah, I use ChatGPT all the time at work, but I don't tell anyone." And that is because these groups here are the departments of no. They're here to tell you don't use, basically security will say don't use it. It's a security vulnerability. Don't put any data on it. HR will say, there's no training for this. No one's allowed to use it. It could be a violation. And then legal says, oh, this, we haven't signed off on it. But the funny thing is, every single one of these departments is using it internally. I promise you, legal, they're one of the first ones to use these technologies. But then they say, rules for thee and not for me. I literally had a friend who was pushing to get ChatGPT and stuff used in his company, and legal just told him flat no, stop asking, we're not going to do this. And then later he found out that legal was using the AI already. Guess what? Everyone is using it individually, including the C-suite. CEOs, CFOs, CIOs, they're often the biggest power users, but they haven't figured out all the infrastructure. They haven't figured out how to build the railroads yet. That's where we're at. Now, here's the thing, and I'm harping on this again partly because it was my home base, but these are also, if I was still in enterprise, these are the conversations I would be having right now with developers and everyone who wants to roll this out. And this is the conversation that I'm having with clients that I am consulting for. So first, it's not that intelligence is the bottleneck, but identity, which is, what do you have access to? So we don't really have an AI version of RBAC yet. So RBAC means role-based access control. Now, even if we did, so this is still not necessarily how it's gonna work, but the idea that people like Dwarkesh are going for is, okay, well, why don't we just do the same thing that we do for humans and then do it for an AI? Well, remember, all of the affordances of things like role-based access control and SOC 2 compliance and all the data that you have access to, and even the way that you're trained is geared around how a human works. It's geared around the affordances of a human body, where you have two hands, you have two eyes, and you have one butt that can be in one chair at one time. That's just not how AI works. That's not how agents work. For an AI agent, the best thing you can do is give it a single task. You say, go do this task and dog this task until it's done. And that's what we're currently doing with agents and what people like Andre Carpathy are doing with his little council of AIs. It's like figuring out, how do we create agent frameworks and agent fleets that are able to do each of these components, like task decomposition and task assignment, and then, task checking. So this is one of the things that I've been saying for a while that OpenAI is now implementing, where they've created agents that all that they do is are security agents. Their best practice is agents to read repos to say, hey, are there any security vulnerabilities in the code that the coding agents wrote? Okay, cool. Go find those vulnerabilities and go patch them, which is exactly the kind of task decomposition that you'd expect to see as you're unbundling what a human job is and refactoring it, rebuilding it for AI and machines. Now, so we're here. So the sigmoid curve of progress, we're probably about here, further up the curve in terms of machine capability. Now, obviously, the ceiling of machine capability is very, very high, and we're going to start to see diminishing returns. And of course, nobody fully agrees as to whether or not we're seeing diminishing returns in aggregate. Obviously, I think that people do agree we're seeing diminishing returns in terms of just brute force scaling, but now there's test time compute and other things. But what there is there's a second S curve, which is adoption. So the adoption S curve, we're still at the very beginning. We're at the ground floor. So high hype, low adoption, building infrastructure, and lots of org friction. That's exactly where we're at. And it just takes time. It takes time for CFOs to be convinced. It takes time for CTOs to make the cases. It takes time to pivot cultures. It's a great time to be in the consulting space. I'm here to tell you that, because we're trying to get from here to here. And I've made previous videos where I talk about adoption curves. Now, adoption curves are accelerating. Whenever you look at, the rate at which AI is being adopted, it's going faster than any other technology, but we're still only at the baby steps phase. So, in 3 to 5 years, we're going to be here in terms of AI adoption. And then in the meantime, in 3 to 5 years, the technology will be fully AGI or ASI or whatever it is that you want to call it. It will be orders of magnitude better than it is today. And the enterprises are going to still be playing catch up. So that's just the way that things go, is that many enterprises are very, very skeptical. They're skeptical and they are conservative by default because the primary thing they are doing is they're managing risk. First and foremost, the job of every large enterprise and every large organization is to control for risk first and foremost. And that is to protect their existing value streams and not just tear everything down and refactor it from the ground up. It would be like, imagine if someone said, okay, we have old steel rail and now we want to upgrade the entirety of all rail in America to maglev. That's a big project, even though it's functionally still the same idea of putting trains on rails. So that's why it's taking so long. So what you really need to do if you want to understand where we're going and why it's slow and what to do next is the benchmarks are fine. Every time you see a model card come out, there's literally dozens of benchmarks. And from an infrastructure guy's perspective, from a CTO's perspective, it's like, okay, great. I don't really care about the benchmarks. All that tells me is that it's good enough to do work. Now, how do I get it CSIO approved, which is Chief Information Security Officer? How do I deploy RBAC for agents? What does SOC 2 compliance look like for all this? And there is no best practices for any of this yet. And when you say there's no best practices, when there's no industry standards for any of this stuff, that is literally the end of the conversation with most C-suites, with most board of directors and all of that stuff. That is where it ends. It's like, okay, it's still a shiny toy to them. They don't care. So it will once these are done in the next year or 2 or 3 for most organizations, then the uptake is going to be a little bit better. But I'm here to tell you that's going to be boring, and that's not going to make headlines. It's going to be really boring on the internet space. And as a podcaster, that's what people like Dwarkesh miss. So, in hindsight or recapping, it isn't about stalling. It's just about digesting. We're digesting the new stuff. So the output gap is it mistakes adoption friction for technical failure. It's not technical failure. I'm here to tell you that the technology is progressing faster than any other technology has ever progressed. That is not the problem. And it's going to keep progressing. It is not because the technology is not capable. It is because Dwarkesh just doesn't have that 15 years of enterprise grind that some of us have to understand that, yeah, this is the most aggravating and frustrating thing is when an organization or an institution or an enterprise tells you no. And it's like, guys, this technology is so obvious. It sells itself. Let me put it in, even when it's already shadow IT. So legal, security, HR, all of that stuff, they haven't even figured out how to train for this stuff yet. So with all that being said, that is why we are seeing things slowing down. It is not technical capability. The technical capability is going plenty fast. It is entirely organizational friction. So there you have it. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you all later.